Hello and welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels. My name is Sarah Schiel and I work in the Directorate General for External Policies. It's 18:30 Brussels time in the afternoon, and starting already at the beginning of the day today and continuing tomorrow, we have the pleasure to welcome in the European Parliament a delegation from the Parliament of Canada for an interparliamentary meeting. It's the 42nd official meeting that has taken place between the European Parliament and the Parliament of Canada. The first, I think, perhaps before many of the guests have entered politics, took place in March 1975. So that will give you some indication of the length and depth of this particular very, very close relationship. As actors in international affairs, whether on energy, whether on climate, trade, or other issues, Canada and the EU are very much aligned and working cooperatively, bilaterally, and in multilateral forums. The goal today of this event, which will be rather short and informal, is to meet and hear from 4 of the parliamentarians who have been meeting today, and to give a brief flavour of how the discussions are going and what kind of topics have been on the agenda. Let me briefly introduce the 4 speakers. On my right-hand side, I have Madame Stéphanie Yoncotin. She's a member of the European Parliament, chair of the European Parliament delegation for Canada, and co-chair of the meeting today. Welcome to you. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I also have on my left-hand side Mr. Francesco Sorbara. He's a member of Parliament from the Parliament of Canada, chair of the Canada-Europe Parliamentary Association, and also co-chairing today's event. Welcome to you, Mr. Sorbara.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here today.
Good to have you in Brussels. We have with us Senator David Wells. He's from the Canadian Parliament. He's from the Upper House and Vice Chair of the Canada-Europe Parliamentary Association. Welcome to you, Senator.
It's great to be here, Sarah.
Thanks for coming along. And last but not least, Mr. Javier Moreno Sanchez, member of the European Parliament, Vice Chair of the EP Canada delegation. Welcome to you.
Buenas tardes, Sara. Gracias por invitarnos.
Gracias. Alors, on continue en français ou en anglais?
Un peu en français, un peu en anglais.
Ça va. I will start with you, Mrs. Yoncotin. Can you briefly tell us how today has been going? What were your impressions and takeaways from today?
Ça a été une journée très enrichissante. On a débattu de nombreux domaines qui finalement concernent très précisément le Canada, l'Union européenne, dans lesquels on a vraiment des intérêts communs, mais également le monde entier, puisqu'il s'agissait de parler des aspects de défense, de intelligence artificielle, il est tard, et également du CETA, ce fameux accord de libre-échange entre le Canada et l'Europe qui a plus de 5 ans, de coopération en matière d'énergie dans un contexte géopolitique très tendu et de guerre en Ukraine. On a terminé notre soirée par la signature d'un accord commun, un joint statement, qui montre à quel point nous sommes déterminés à travailler ensemble davantage, à renforcer notre coopération sur ces sujets mondiaux pour véritablement faire face à tous ces défis, des doubles transitions dont vous avez parlé également, transition climatique, numérique et également tous ces enjeux liés également à la guerre en Ukraine, comme je l'ai dit, et aux tensions entre différents pays, les rapports de force notamment avec les États-Unis, avec la Chine.
Merci beaucoup. Mr. Sorbara, maybe same question to you from the Canadian perspective. How did today go?
Thank you, Sarah. First of all, it's just wonderful to be back in Brussels in person. This is the first opportunity we've had to come over post-pandemic, so it's great to be here in person and speaking with and collaborating with our European colleagues. At this critical juncture in the world's history, the relationship between Canada and the European Union has never been stronger. We're collaborating on so many fronts. Today, again, discussing the issues of foreign policy, defense, the alignment there between the Canada and the European Union. On trade, just the 5th or 6th year of application application of the CETA agreement, which has seen, just a tremendous growth in trade, in investment, in jobs between Canada and the European Union. Again, a win-win for our peoples in both Canada and the European Union. And again, just signifies the shared values that we have for each other, the deep respect we have for human rights, for democracy, and ensuring those pillars in our relationship are strengthened and continue to strengthen. It was great to see the collaboration today that we heard from with regards from the individual who presented on CETA, with regards to defense policy, where obviously Canada and the European Union work together at NATO, but also Canada joining the European Union's military mobility project, another sign of the deepening ties between Canada and the European Union. This afternoon we discussed artificial intelligence, something that all countries are dealing with, all countries are regulating, and again, the cooperation that we're seeing and the collaboration we're seeing between Canada and the European Union. Since the war broke out in Ukraine, the unity that has been seen between Canada and the European Union has been, there's been no gray. It's only been purely white in terms of standing together for the rule of law, standing together for the Ukrainian people, for Ukraine's territorial integrity. And that will remain a steadfast principle in our relationship. And we will continue to collaborate in all areas that benefit our two peoples. It's a very constructive relationship. It's a very long-time relationship, again, based on shared values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sorbara. I'm going to bring in Mr. Javier Sanchez, and I'm going to ask him maybe to elaborate a bit on CETA. You mentioned it already, the trade agreement, which I think was agreed in 2016 and has provisionally come into force in 2017. Can you say a few words on what that means for the European Union and for Canada?
Yeah, for the European Union, Canada is a crucial partner. It's always been, and now more than ever. Francesco mentioned the geopolitical situation, and as he said, it's a win-win agreement. It's a success story, and 5 years ago there was not, in the public opinion, a good mood on this agreement. But we see, after 5 years of provisional implementation, that is a win-win. It's increased in not only in trade, but in jobs for both part of the agreement. Maybe more for the European Union than for the Canada, but we will try to balance that. And it's important because we have to give some visibility to this agreement, because there are still 10 countries who didn't ratify, and as parliamentarians, we have to use the parliamentary diplomacy in order to convince our national members of parliaments to ratify. As I said, we are in a geopolitical context very difficult, and for the European Union, we have to rethink our partners, trade partners, but the CETA agreement is more than just a trade agreement. It's in the framework of the relationship with Canada. I think it's a very good instrument in order to cooperate in all the areas that Francesco mentioned, and also Stephanie, on food security, energy security, climate change, artificial intelligence, and migration also, and counterterrorism. And I think if we don't have trade with Canada, because, as I said before, Canadians are the people more European outside Europe. So we have to continue, and it was a very important day today.
Thank you. And indeed, as you say, the statistics and the data tell the story. You don't need they are very convincing. And you mentioned as well, Mr. Moreno Sanchez, that of course in a trade relationship, balances can shift and can change. And I want to mention one area where perhaps Canada has a strategic advantage over the European Union, and that's in energy. And I want to bring you in, Senator Wells, and ask you if you can talk to us a little bit about how the EU and Canada are cooperating on energy and climate. Access to critical materials is also very much on the agenda now. And obviously in the context of the war against Ukraine, Europe is looking to rebalance its energy sources and energy supply. Can you say a few words from the Canadian perspective on those issues?
Sure, I can. And it's a great question, because there is a changing dynamic in the world now, not just with the war in Ukraine, but with the global consensus on climate change and the activity that we see now, even in Canada right now, with the wildfires, flooding in other parts of the world, we can see there's destabilization of the climate, and I think there's a global consensus on that. Canada, of course, is an energy-rich country. We have hydroelectric, we have natural gas, we have nuclear, we have oil. So Canada can play a role, and especially now in the geopolitical climate in Europe, where there's a clear weaning off of Russian oil and gas, and Canada can be a responsible supplier. We have trade agreements, we have long-time partnerships, we know each other well. This is well-worn territory for both Europe and Canada. So it's a role that Canada can play. It's a role Canada wishes to play, and especially in the transition when we talk about climate change, the transition to what eventually might be a petroleum-reduced world. That will take many years, maybe some generations, but natural gas is well known as a transition fuel. And Canada has huge supplies of that and can supply it and is ready to supply. So, but it is a real changing dynamic globally. Climate change, the war, obviously recent inflation that no one saw coming, and just the relationship that we have with our European partners. It's when we talk about the problems, these aren't the first time that we address them. It's a continuing dialogue that we have.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the geopolitical situation, and I think it's fair to say we are in a troubled time geopolitically. EU and Canada, as I think a couple of the speakers have mentioned, have this very long, close, well-aligned partnership. They work very well together on foreign policy. Of course, Canada and most EU member states are partners inside NATO. I'm going to ask you, Francesco Sorbara, to tell us a little bit about how Canada and Europe are working together, especially if I mention two big challenges. One is obviously the war of aggression against Ukraine. And another issue, which of course is high on the agenda, especially I think in the United States, is the Indo-Pacific and the China-Taiwan question. Tricky ones. I don't know if you can give a short answer on these kind of questions, but I'll let you give it.
I'll try to be brief on two of them, on both of them. On Ukraine, Canada is a steadfast friend and ally of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. We were the first country to ratify Ukraine's membership in NATO. We have one of the largest Ukrainian diasporas in the world in Canada. They've been there for many generations. We began training Ukrainian soldiers many, many years ago. We are currently, we have Canadian Army officials and engineers and so forth in Poland training Ukrainian soldiers, in the United Kingdom training Ukrainian soldiers. We are doing our part in as much heavy lifting as possible to ensure that the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army have the resources and tools to defeat a tyrant, to ensure Ukraine's territorial integrity. And we were working lockstep with our European partners and friends, and we will continue to do so. On the Indo-Pacific strategy, our government launched a revised Indo-Pacific strategy approximately I think 2 months ago. It's sort of really much from what we've understood today in line with what the European Union is doing. Again, reflects the importance of the Indo-Pacific. We have India, we have many other countries that are growing at a very rapid clip, becoming very important. That relationship needs to be solidified. India is the largest democracy in the world. We have a very large Indian diaspora in Canada, and we continue to have productive and constructive relations with them, with the Philippines and many other countries. The Indo-Pacific will continue to be an increasingly important aspect of the world in a very shifting geopolitical scene. And I think I know we will work together with the European Union and all member states to ensure that the values that we hold dear of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law are also spoken to and about within that region as well.
Thank you so much. And I understand you'll be visiting NATO tomorrow to further some of those discussions. Maybe I will have one last question for you, Mrs. Young-Courtin, because I see on your programme that you have had a session today on artificial intelligence. And that's something where, in fact, the European Parliament has been working intensively in recent times. We will be voting, in fact, next week on a report on AI. Do you think there that Canada and the EU are completely aligned, or do we have different perspectives on that issue?
Well, I think they're quite aligned. As you know, there are no borders in the digital world. So an EU-Canada cooperation is definitely key to benefit the European and Canadian citizens and enterprises. And we are all witnessing this digital transition like a big wave. And I think it will be essential to work together to set human-centric, trustworthy and also I would say innovative global standards, especially when we are talking about artificial intelligence. Et si vous me permettez à la fin de dire qu'on a parlé ici beaucoup de coopération économique, de coopération politique, de coopération stratégique, et tout ça repose sur une amitié profonde, un partenariat, si je peux dire, fraternel, profond, et c'est la Normande qui vous parle. On est aujourd'hui le 8 juin. Il y a 2 jours, le 6 juin, j'avais l'honneur et le plaisir de faire découvrir à nos amis députés, sénateurs canadiens et québécois les plages du Débarquement, les commémorations qui ont rendu hommage notamment à tous ces soldats canadiens et québécois morts sur les plages du Débarquement et autour pour délivrer la Normandie à l'époque du joug nazi. Et avec ce retour de la guerre en Ukraine, je crois que qui nous lie avant tout, ce sont ces valeurs de liberté, de fraternité, de paix. Qui très tôt ont fait que ce partenariat entre l'Union européenne et le Canada est l'un des plus vieux et l'un des plus consistants et l'un des plus importants. Alors vive cette amitié franco-canadienne et canado-européenne. J'ai dit franco parce que j'ai voulu parler de ce qui s'est passé sur ces plages du Débarquement et moi je suis très touchée justement par cette coopération qui est plus que jamais importante.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la députée. Alors, je crois avec ça, on va terminer notre petit échange. I would like to thank our 4 speakers, Mrs. Young-Courtin, Mr. Sobara, Senator Wells, and Mr. Moreno-Sanchez. Thank you for letting us know what you are working on, and we wish you, of course, a good continuation of your work and of EU and Canada cooperation. Thank you.
Gracias.
Goodbye from Brussels.
Welcome.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you.